It looks like the GPU price war is well underway with prices going down, and it's not only the expensive GPUs, it's GPUs you may actually want to buy in a more reasonable price range. Pretty significant price drop that we saw is going to come from this guy. This is Intel, the Intel Arc, and specifically this is going to be the A770. This one that I'm holding here, as you can see, is the special edition with 16 gigabytes of VRAM. The one they dropped the price on to $269 is still an A770, but it has 8 gigabytes of VRAM. As you can see, this particular one is like the Intel Reference Edition, while the price drop one is going to be the ASRock $269 GPU. So the question here is, what is Intel Arc exactly? When it first came out, if you guys remember, I said it wasn't ready. I said the GPU is not something you should buy unless you want to tinker with it and unless you're going to be a beta tester and put up with a lot of performance issues, even crashing, all these driver issues that Intel Arc had. That's pretty objective. Even Intel themselves agreed that the GPU wasn't ready. But they've definitely been hard at work. Like, I've been playing with this GPU. I put it in my system and it's kind of impressive. It's been much more stable. The drivers are better. They even updated for much more like DX9 support. Those are going to be older games. Of course, DirectX 12 is going to be where this really primarily focuses on. And in a way, going up against NVIDIA, even though you're not going to really do ray tracing on these GPUs, Intel Arc actually does ray tracing really well, and sometimes the A770 even beats the RTX 3060. This is going to cause a really big issue in the GPU market for the GPU companies. We've been dealing with the issues on our side for the last 2 or 3 years because of all the shortages and very expensive GPUs. If a GPU like this is now $269 from $319, which is a significant price drop when you're talking about the price of this GPU. If you have like a $50 or $60 price drop on a 4080, nobody really bats an eye because it basically just goes from like, $1,300 to $1,250. Nobody notices it. It's a small percentage. But if you have a price drop that size on a GPU that's considerably cheaper, then it starts to be interesting. Now, Intel Arc, I'm not going to say that everybody should get one at this price over another competing GPU. Don't forget, AMD does have the 6650 XT, the 6600 XT. Those are all actually really good and stable 1080p GPUs, even some 1440p. So there's definitely that. The AMD, even though it has some driver issues once in a while, they're still better than Intel, and they're still going to have much better game support in general. And those GPUs are definitely pretty cheap. Some of them will come in even below the Intel Arc. So I just want to paint a full objective picture here so that you guys know that there are options. And then on the other end of the spectrum, NVIDIA, in my opinion, even though I personally think they have the best GPUs on the market, regardless of price, I know, hold your pitchforks, they have the 4090 and the 4080. If you take the price away, it's still a pretty good GPU. And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. When we start talking about the more mid-range and the cheaper GPU market, NVIDIA's GPUs are starting to get a little bit old. I mean, they have the RTX 3060, 3060 Ti, 3050, the 1660, which is very popular, but they're getting a little bit old and they're still way too expensive. If you could go and find an RTX 3060 for the same price as the Arc GPU, then yeah, you probably might want to go towards the NVIDIA side if it's going to be cheaper. But in reality, it's really not going to be that price, and the aforementioned AMD competition is there, making sure that you remember they're going to be a little bit better price to performance. So this is going to mean that as NVIDIA tries to release its next generation GPUs that compete in this market, such as the 4060, the 4050, 4060 Ti, they're going to have a lot of pricing issues. It's obvious they're going to price those GPUs much higher than we've seen in the past. If the 4070 Ti is $799, you can expect the 4070 to be probably at least $599 to $699. Therefore, the 4060 probably will be something like $499. It's probably going to replace the price that the old 3070 used to be at $499. But what does that mean? I mean, sure, it's a 4060, but we know that they're probably going to really limit the performance. It might have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and maybe the memory bus and the bandwidth won't be all that great. I mean, take a look at the 12 gigabyte of VRAM 4070 Ti, 192-bit memory bus. I did numerous videos on why it is a serious limitation going forward, and it's going to be no different for an 8 gigabyte GPU. Now, the A770, it is 8 gigabytes for that $269 model. But this one here, this is the special edition Arc GPU, is actually 16 gigabytes. This was $349. I'm not sure if they've dropped the price on this one yet, but you can probably expect this one to also go down in price. You can actually see the price right here. I try to rip the sticker off, but it's very stubborn. I didn't want to damage it, but there you go. So 16 gigabytes, in my opinion, is where you really want to be for future proofing. Even at this level, you can throw a lot of textures on the, even if you're not doing ray tracing. But in general, I do agree that most people are not going to be turning on ray tracing with GPUs of this sort of price class. That's when you start getting up to, the 4070 Ti and above, 4080, even the AMD like 7900 XT. That's when you really want to turn on all of the eye candy and play at full resolution with maybe DLSS or something like that to help it along. But these GPUs are definitely a little bit limited at 8 gigabytes of VRAM, but you can still scrape away with it because it's not something you would ever really play in 4K. And even 1440p, while the Intel Arc GPUs do really well at that resolution, a lot of people play at 1080p, and that's why a lot of these 8 gigabyte to 12 gigabyte GPUs are still okay, even though I would love to see a minimum of 12 gigabytes on the lower end GPUs and at least 16 gigabytes on like 4060s and 4070s on up. But once again, we may not really see that, limiting some of the future, proofability of these type of GPUs. But very interesting to see that the Intel Arc is now $269. Remember, the A750 is $249, which is not as cheap as an AMD 6600 or even some of the 6600 XTs that you can find around in the market, but it's still a much better price, and it shows that Intel is really trying to break into the market. So I must say that my opinion of Intel GPUs are definitely changed. I think they've done some good progress. But don't get me wrong, they're definitely not there yet. NVIDIA has an absolutely dominating lead, and AMD still has a really big lead as well over Intel. It's hard enough to get people to buy AMD GPUs if you're AMD, and imagine Intel coming in. So they're going to have not only great pricing, but also stable drivers and performance that really punches above its weight class. If they come in with like a competitor to NVIDIA that's basically the same and a little bit less for just a little bit less of a price, they're not going to make it. I mean, look at AMD. They struggle with that same metric. And remember, NVIDIA has the capability to keep selling their older GPUs that people will buy, as well as price some of their newer stuff even lower if they feel like they really need to have a competitive edge. But for now, looks like Intel is doing the right things. I mean, they're releasing lots of drivers. Even Hogwarts had driver support for the Intel Arc before AMD had it. And I played through the game, a lot of it, with an Intel Arc GPU, this one here that I showed you guys, and it actually played pretty decently. I was surprised that you can get some decent performance out of this GPU for not that much money, especially considering that the A770 8 gigabytes is now at $269. So while I don't say it's the best GPU you can buy at that price, it is definitely getting there with improvements, and I'm sure Intel is probably losing a lot of money trying to break into the market, but they're going to have to gain the trust of gamers and consumers. If they do, this is a pretty good chance for them to gain a lot of market share because people are annoyed at NVIDIA's, pricing practices, and AMD has had lots of chances to really break into the market more, but at the end of the day, it always seems like they do something to hold themselves back. It's like that meme where you see the guy putting a stick through the spoke of his bicycle wheel and he's like blaming something else. I mean, AMD has had its own driver issues that had some cooler issues with the newer GPUs. And of course, it kind of holds back product to keep the prices a little bit higher on the shelves instead of discounting things and making it just, kind of flood the market a little bit at cheaper prices where people would buy, but they're not going to buy at more expensive prices. So Intel has to not follow that playbook. It's an interesting battle. Remember, Intel is a massive company. They're not some startup that they're just getting into the brisk of things. Even though GPUs are new to them, they have big infrastructure, lots of money behind them to make things happen. So it's going to be interesting what happens. It may be a long game for the next few years. And while I don't think NVIDIA is particularly worried at this point, they may start to get worried about that lower to mid-range market because that's exactly where Intel is targeting. And AMD, even though they've done well for price to performance in that sort of landscape, they could definitely kind of get crushed first by Intel. So definitely good to keep an eye on it, but good to see GPU prices finally coming down. All right, guys, so remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.